then you owe me money because they were late. I said, you were good for the guy. And when they did, she said, don't work that way. I said, well.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for the purpose of getting as much information as possible for our Project 20. We have with us this afternoon Ms. Shirley and Dr. Tramel Seck and Mr. Angel Mendoza, who is a current board member, and the two ladies are former board members. And they're going to share with us this afternoon some of the information that they recall from the inception of the organization and the early years of the Watts Health Foundation. Mr. Frank Sotelo will be asking questions, and he will be the interviewer for this afternoon. Mr. Sotelo, it's yours.
It's back and forth. You can answer them if there's somebody that has a little different idea of what it was. You know, everybody can interact. We would also like to get your idea of the community at that time, and also what you see it now toward the end of the interview. First of all, when did you join the board of directors of the Watts Health Foundation?
Well, I was one of the original members of the board, so I joined at the very beginning. I was a member of the task force that began to develop the whole concept of it with Dr. Georgie back in late 1967, I believe, 68. When Dr. Georgie was going around from place to place here in the community trying to drum up support for the idea of a comprehensive health center. So at the very beginning I was a member.
What other people were along with you in that, as part of that task force?
I don't remember.
Yes, it's hard to remember names. I do have some pictures which were taken as a part of the development of the program for the opening of the center. But it's just difficult to remember.
I do remember some of them. Of course, there was this lady here. I've forgotten her name. I've forgotten it.
Mrs. Shaw.
Miss Burdell Moore.
Burdell Moore, of course.
Mrs. Crosby.
Mrs. Walton.
Mrs. Crosby was one of the original members of the task force.
Was Mother McCluster one of those original members also?
I remember her being part of the original board, but whether she was a member of the task force, I don't remember. This is many, many years ago. We're talking about 20 years ago.
That's why I meant by Mrs. Shaw. I think her name is Shaw.
Yeah, Miss Frida Shaw.
Frida Shaw.
That's her name.
Exactly.
Yeah, she was one of the originals.
I too was a member of the original, of the founding board. I can remember being interviewed by a panel which included James Bates, I think Dr. Georgie, and one other member in a trailer further down on this side of the street.
Jim Bates was her assistant, wasn't that who he was? Yeah, he was her assistant. Yeah.
I can remember it, some of the questions having to do with our perceptions, or at least my perception, of the use of violence as an avenue for black people to get ahead in the country versus the kind of building approach which they were envisioning with this health center.
I remember at the time in the community, when you asked about what was happening in the community at that time, the largest, most viable organization at that particular time was Watts Westminster Neighborhood Center. And at the time I was administrator with the settlement house. And it had the largest following and was one of the larger organizations at that particular time, along with OIC.
And the Sons of Watts.
And the Sons of Watts. We had just come out of our first successful Watts Summer Festival, remember. And the community was feeling very good about itself at that point, that it had developed an original idea and that the Watts Summer Festival had come off extremely well. And they had started building in the community a unity, moving away from the depressive feeling of not being worth very much, the idea that this was a community that was very poor and everybody looked down on us, to a point of having a great deal of pride coming from that particular festival and a variety of other community organizations and groups that were beginning to develop. And this was another example of it, because it said to the people here, federal government is concerned about what's happening to us. The federal government cares enough about Watts that it wants to develop one of its comprehensive health centers in this particular community. We're important, we're somebody, and the federal government has to begin to address our needs. So there was a feeling of pride in that regard in reference to this particular group.
And I think also that, and the reason I pointed up the issue of violence, we can remember that from 1965 through certainly the early 70s, there had been a number of riots across the country. Certainly in 1968, following the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and certainly into 1969, there was a considerable amount of concern about whether or not this community, in addition, would explode again. Since conditions were not changing very rapidly, and there was a great deal of concern about raising expectations at the same time they weren't satisfying expectations. So they were very concerned about, given the fact that the center was planned, in making that the center a reality, because there had been the concern about, if we raise the community's expectations and do not fulfill those expectations, will there be additional difficulties here in Watts? I had some concern at that time about designating, about the boundaries which were defined, the boundaries of the area that was to be served by this health center. We all know that while they called this the Watts riot, the riot was in Los Angeles. It started on 116th and Avalon, and the National Guard troops were all the way over in the Crenshaw area. But since whether or not this was a local definition of Watts as the area, as the sole area of the rebellion, or whether or not this was determined in Washington, I'm not sure. But the issue then became that the health center could serve an area which ended at Central and Imperial, down to 92nd, and over to Wilmington. And I know one of the things that Mrs. Moore said in our previous lunch, and one of the things that we were very concerned about at the time was, what about the people that live just west of Central Avenue? What about those kinds of health needs? What about the whole notion of looking at the development of the Los Angeles community, which of course is what the Watts Health Foundation has gone on to do.
You know, there was a flip side too, along with the idea about geographical boundary lines and limiting how many people could receive services. The flip side of that was the concern of a number of us. I remember I was quite concerned about it when Dr. George first started coming around the community. What, in fact, was USC Hospital and a variety of other places planning to do to us? There was also this feeling of paranoia, which we had every right to feel, that the institutions of the society didn't generally operate to meet our needs. And if they were all of a sudden very eager to come over and provide us with something that they hadn't provided us with before, we had some feeling as to, now what does this mean? What are they trying to do to us? And one of the things that we wrestled a lot with in those first board meetings, as you remember, was what will be the role of medical personnel with our center? Will we allow medical students to do their internship here? Will we allow our residents to do their internship? How many full-fledged doctors are in fact going to be here? What is going to be the role of clients and patients who come to the facility? Will they be experimental clients? Will they be used as guinea pigs for the larger community? Or will they in fact be given the best of services? Will they be seen as second-class citizens, as they often felt they were when they went to the general hospitals run by the county and were the targets that gave, not targets, but the focal point of providing most health services to poor people? Was this going to be continued all over again with this health center? As you remember, we wrestled with that at a number of meetings. The end result, of course, was we said no medical students were to practice here, no residents were to work here, only full-fledged doctors were to come here. And this came out of our feelings of having been used so much in the past by the health delivery system that we never did get adequate, proper health services. So those were two issues I remember that we spent a lot of time on.
And I think that the really interesting part, and I think growth promoting part for a number of us, was the whole concept of a policy-making board of citizens. Out of under OEO's maximum feasible participation of the poor, this board was actually to set policy for the center, not to act in an advisory capacity and to come up with recommendations which in fact administration could or could not take, but rather we were to set policy.
Now there was a lot of fighting about that.
There was lots of fighting about that, and in addition, what we found, and sometimes to the chagrin of the administration, was that the board did not act and pattern its behavior on the model of a corporate board, which came in at 6 in the evening and took care of their business in an hour and 15 minutes, had their coffee, and left. Sometimes when there were really issues to be dealt with, we were meeting 3 times a week. Our meetings went from 7 until 11:30, 12 at night. They were not always without acrimony, and by that I mean raised voices.
But you know, the reason for that was that we came from a variety of different points of view and social standing. I remember that you and I used to talk about the fact that being a black professional woman on the board, and that was one of the roles that I had, that I came under attack on a variety of different levels. I came under attack because I was a female and the males wanted to control and dominate the power. I came under attack because I was a professional woman and those who were not professionals or who were welfare clients said, well, I don't know if I can trust what Shirley Better says. After all, she's a social worker and I don't know whether social workers can be trusted. The other, she's middle class, she lives on the other side of the freeway, they were talking about Harbor Freeway. Again, can she be trusted? She doesn't really know what goes on in this community because she's not poor. And is she really committed to the needs of the community? And I think through that board, I began to get the beginning of my own acceptance inside the community as a person that could be trusted and a person who was committed to the needs of the community. And I think the class differences and life experiences made for a richness that I think strengthened whatever has happened in the 15 to 20 years later, that we fought out all of those things among ourselves with a matter of goodwill. And I think that made a great deal of difference.
Let me ask you this. I'm sure the community was all in favor of the health center, but was there any opposition from the professional field, your dentists, your doctors, your pharmacists here in the community?
There was a great deal of concern about that. I remember there were several physicians who were concerned that now that there was a health center coming, that they would lose their clientele. They said, in effect, look, we came to the Watts community when there were no other health professionals around. We provided services to welfare recipients and to poor people, and now that the federal government has some money available, they're going to push this out and take away our clientele and make it very difficult for us. There were those who felt that this was going to hurt their own particular practice, while there were others who had that concern as well as the concern, is this health center going to really provide quality health services to the clients? So there were those who were concerned on both ends. So there was a great deal of discussion back and forth, and Dr. Georgie spent a great deal of time dealing with the resistance of the doctors here in the Watts community.
Well, Mr. Mendoza, let's hear from you. You're a long-time born and raised resident of this area. Maybe you can give us your perspective, pre-1965 and on to the present.
Well, I was born here up the street here from the Catholic Church on 100th Street and Compton Avenue. And at that time, it is nothing like it happened. What happened took place during the riots. It was all country people, farmers. So generally, I don't know if it's that due to the fact that you're raised in a farm or you are a farmer, you don't go into violence as much. But the medication need was always needed, even at that time. Because I do remember people going on the slow train, the Watts Express, to the General Hospital, and you had to take a lunch. So you wouldn't be back till nightfall. The sun was down anyway. And I remember that a lot of people that even lived past Compton, Dominguez Hill, Saniana, they were mostly all farmers, and labor hands especially used to come to Watts for spend their money. They'd work all week, and then on Friday nights they'd come into Watts. They were all farm hands, beet toppers, what have you. Even because there was even citrus orchards in Dominguez Hills at that time, and I guess all around us, and a lot of sugar beets, alfalfa fields, hay fields, and coming up on Wilmington, there used to be adobe houses, and I think the last one was torn down. When I came out of the service in '46, and there was still one standing there. I think it was 108th or 107th and Graham, but that was torn down during, I think, 46, 47. And when I came on the scene, I think it was either give or take a year. I think it was in '75. I'm not quite sure. And it was still a grapes, 130 grapes, and it was in bungalows. They were really had been outused as far as I was concerned. And up till when we had the groundbreaking here, as things just, I think the first year after second year, I think we could see that we were growing fast, that soon this place would be too small for us. Because then I got on the committee and was the chairman to that corpus facility, which really is a safety committee. And at that time I pointed out, hey, this thing is already out, we are growing this place, and there's not room for anybody, especially the officers. You go, it'd be crowded, it'd be files. Really, if there had been an emergency, I think some of them would have been trapped. And till this day, we haven't been able to, really get out where you can say we overcome that of having enough space. And the way it looks, I don't know when we'll catch up.
Let me go back to Mr. Pettis. How long were you on the board? The actual board, after being on the advisory and the task force?
Do you remember how long I was on the board?
I think
We both served the same length of time.
yes, through the end of 1969.
Was that it? Yeah. Because about that time I started teaching, so yeah, it must have been about '69.
There was also some change at that time. I'm not quite sure. I do not recall what the nature of it was.
But I think we both left at the same time. It may have been just a complete changeover in reference to who would serve on the board. I don't remember at that time.
It might have been a part of the bylaws in terms of membership revolving off. I don't recall. But I do know that under the whole concept of maximum feasible participation of the board, there was a recognition that that the cost of participation was positive, meaning that it cost money. It cost gas money, it cost car fare money, it cost money. So board members were compensated at the rate of $15 per meeting for attending on the same assumption, based just as members of corporate boards are compensated for their participation. We were also provided with attaché cases. We had name plates for our meetings and so on, because I think that they wanted to make sure that we felt that the role that we were playing was as significant as any policy-making board in any other center. But I'm not quite sure why we revolved, if we revolved off, if there was some other kind of change.
Well, there was a difference in the type of membership too.
That's true.
I served as an agency representative, so that there were different classifications of membership. And as an agency representative, I represented Westminster Neighborhood Association. And as agency representative, I didn't get the $15 a week.
As a matter of fact, you recall that there was a distinction between the agency representatives and the professionals. They did not receive the stipends.
Right.
As a matter of fact, if you recall, the professionals weren't permitted to hold office.
That's probably
correct.
why
And the
I never
agency
had an office.
representatives as well.
That's
Because
correct.
as a
They
matter of
could not
fact,
hold
I
office.
was first vice chairman during that period. So I was a community, quote-unquote, community representative, because what differentiated some frequently the community representatives from others were sort of negligible.
Well, how did you happen to find out about a position on the board? Do you remember how that occurred? Because you said you were interviewed
That's correct.
by some people.
I don't recall. Now, whether or not I heard through James Bates, or I'm not really sure, but I do know that there was a screening process where they sort of wanted to know what your history was in the community, what you had, what kinds of organizations you were involved in, what your understanding of the needs of the community were, and what your general perspective was on bringing about positive change in the community.
Well, I
And
know
those
that.
kinds of questions were certainly asked.
I know one of the reasons Dr. Georgie wanted me on the board was she felt the best way to handle a person who was resistant to the board was to invite them to come on. And as the director of this social service center at that time, I, with the group of community doctors, was a bit concerned about the flip side of what this comprehensive health center was going to do. Was it going to continue the second-class health services that were given to minority people and poor? And I queried her quite a bit about that process and my own concern about what she wanted as an Italian female physician. What was it in it for her? Like a lot of others, I was very skeptical of her intentions at the time. And I think to ensure that I would not be more resistant than I was, because Westminster at that time was a pretty powerful organization, the best way of getting around that was to invite me to serve on the board. And I took it so I could watchdog it and see that she didn't do some negative things at the time. And I'm glad I did, because I feel very pleased about having been able to help with that initial process and to see what's happened now. And I did act as a watchdog to ensure that what I saw as the needs of people in the community were in fact honored by the federal government.
Now that you mention it, there was, as I recall, a good deal of healthy skepticism about the intentions of that big university and Dr. Georgie as a white person coming down into the community to try to start some kind of program. We weren't concerned about whether or not, as you say, it would model the county health, the county hospital model, where folks were used for various kinds of experiments. I also recall, and I can't remember all of this, there was also some skepticism, as I recall, on the part of the community about what it is we were going to be doing there. I do recall as well that the community, at least some community persons, would bring their complaints, their concerns, whether, and one I remember in particular was about the hours the clinic would be open, that they would bring these concerns to board members. I can remember one emergency meeting we had about some community concerns that had been brought to the board. I can't remember, as I say.
I remember one that was sort of a interesting scene that had to do with the gentleman who was the head of the Sons of Watch. You may want to cut this out later, but you remember Riley with a gravelly voice? Frank Riley and a bunch of the fellas were involved with me around a little process. As you remember, when we first put the health center up, it was right next to Jordan Down Housing Project, and what separated the emergency room from the housing project was an alley. And in this alley, situated right at the center there, directly facing the emergency room, was a lamp. You know, the tall outdoor lamps, parking lot, lighting fixture. And so it was interesting and seemed most convenient that the fellows who wanted to gamble at night would gamble right under this lamp post. It was the most convenient place to do it, right next to home, and on a Saturday night next to the light post. Well, you know, from time to time there'd be various, to say the least, allocations going on. And when these allocations would get to the point of fisticuffs or whatever else, well, they would take that fellow immediately right straight into the emergency room. Well, going straight into the emergency room, there would be the fellow who had started the problem, the one who was the victim, and then the friends of both sides. So by the time they moved in a hot second from here, you carry all of your anger, the debate was still on, blood was over several different people, and they rushed in carrying their fight that they were dealing with right into the emergency room. Well, this got to be a problem. First of all, they'd be pushing and shoving among the fellas as they were still trying to work out their own anger about what had happened. They would want to rush in, the friends, into the examination area where the doctor would be with their street clothes, and there would then, from time to time, be a great deal of concern. I even remember one time, my office was in Jordan Downs Housing Project, the offices for the Social Service Center, and a stove blew up in a home, and a child was burned, and she ran out of the house, her hair was on fire, her dress was on fire, and as happens in those instances, nobody could get themselves together soon enough to really stop the girl who started running in panic. When we finally caught her, it was less than 5 minutes, and here we were in the emergency room. The mother is crying, the neighbors are crying, everybody's still feeling all of the pain. The girl is crying and screaming. So all of this would go right into the emergency room. So you can imagine the problems that the emergency room had. There'd be all of this emotion, which generally would have dissipated if you had to drive 20 minutes to wherever you were going. The good thing was that the center was right there, the health service was right there, but the people problem couldn't get dissipated. So as a member of a board and a social worker, I was asked by the doctors to do something about it, because it got to the point that the doctors were pushing and shoving with the fellas or whoever as they came into the emergency room. Not so much the anger, but just the excitement of what was going on. The father would want to go in with his child or whatever, you know, and there would get to be all this tension going on. And then, of course, you know, there's the process of our, what I call, exercising our chest, where a person will talk loud, use some profanity. It's not meant to really deal with anything in any negative way. It's just a way of trying to get rid of whatever feelings you got at the moment. Well, some doctors understood that, and other doctors were quite intimidated by the exercising of one's chest, as I call it. So it got to the point that some of the doctors were carrying guns in their pocket because they had gotten frightened. Because some fellow said, you know, dude, I will wipe you out if you don't such and such. And he didn't mean that. He was just upset at the moment. Doctors not realizing that became concerned. So we had that sort of incident. I remember sitting down with members of the community, sons of wives. Frank Riley went with me to help out. I was there, several of the doctors and nurses, and we sat down in the board meeting to see what we could do to straighten out this problem. And I remember Frank Riley and I were able to come up with some ideas with the fellows who hung out in that area, that if you come into this area with your clothes on, and you insist on coming to the examination room, you spread germs because you have germs on your body. And if you come in, you are interfering with what the doctor's trying to do. He's not trying to keep you from your family or friends. He's trying to protect them from you because you have invisible germs. The fellows were able then to understand the reason why the doctors were doing this. And I, on the other hand, said to the doctors, now look, all you fellas, minority fellas, were not raised in the middle class community. You came from the same place the rest of us come from. And don't pull this professional stuff that you don't understand what's going on here and go into your little class process here. You understand the problem here, you understand what's going on, and you got to relate in a for real place if you're going to work in the Watts community. If you don't want to work and be a part of this community, then you go over there and be a black bourgeoisie if you feel like it. This is not the place to act that out. And we're able to work out problems in that particular fashion. But I do remember that particular incident now. I have forgotten it, but I imagine we still must have some problems like that with the health center of trying to handle that.
One of the novel things that I recall that there was a concept in the beginning of the, what do you call it, the South Central Multipurpose Health Center?
Health Services Center.
Was to concentrate employment on people from the community. Was
Yes.
that a concept that evolved
Yes.
while you guys
Yes.
were there on the board?
Yes.
did you find that it was practical, given the fact that so few of the people would have health experience, training, and that kind of thing?
I'm glad one of the trainers for the outreach workers. I had forgotten that until you mentioned it. We
There's Mr. Clay right out there.
huh?
Do you remember Floyd Clay?
Floyd Clay was one of them.
I think he
Was he from the community?
I don't know. I think he's part of that group.
Okay. I was one of the trainers for the outreach workers. And we insisted, because at that time the philosophy was that you had to use community people as a bridge between the community and the agency, otherwise it wasn't going to work. So we believed in outreach workers, and we insisted upon them being trained. And in many instances, just like Westminster, 45% of the people who worked at Westminster had never held a job before. Back in the 60s. And it was interesting to be an administrator at that time, because the majority of people who worked with you did not have any sort of work experience. And I'm sure that the people who first started working at the South Central Multipurpose Health Services Center, you would say that 40% of them, those who were non-professionals, probably had never worked before. But that was the beauty of the process, because it seems to me that this was a way to get people from the community to connect with the persons there who needed the health services the most. Because we found so often that the ones who most needed the services in the community are the ones who don't know anything about the services that are there, are afraid to come into the services, or for some reason or another get turned off. And how do you get them here? And I think the way to get them here is with other people who will attest that this is a good place.
Yes, and we also were very, very concerned about providing employment, straight out providing employment for persons in the community, and the personnel committee. And I seem to recall serving on the personnel committee. All this is sort of jogging my memory. And I believe at one point, well, I think we were crashing the same kind of myths that get crashed now when people say folks don't want to work. We opened up a few jobs, and the whole community came in to apply for those jobs, and I can recall having to attend a special personnel meeting to attempt to explain to the community that in fact we're not trying to screen folks out, but what we do have to do is to go through the process of hiring for this set of positions and then other sets of positions. But it really crashed into that, the whole notion that people in this community would prefer not to have employment if employment is available. And so we also wanted to watch to safeguard that aspect of it, in addition to making sure that the medical treatment provided was top quality medical treatment, that all of the positions, the full range of positions, not simply the orderlies and the clerks and the lower level positions, but the administrative positions as well, were filled by qualified black folks, and that the black folks who needed, as you indicated, needed some training, who had not had previous labor market experience, had an opportunity to get that experience. Because I think we saw from top to bottom that this was an experiment and an opportunity. The War on Poverty had said maximum feasible participation of the poor throughout.
That's correct.
So that we were going to make policy, which is also something we had to get used to. You mean, our personnel committee in fact sets personnel policy. Our committees are actually doing what needs to be done. And then moving that whole participation philosophy throughout the clinic. I will say, however, that my own feeling at the time was that this project might go the way of many programs that were formed at that time under the concept of maximum feasible participation. That the point of the program was to engage people at a time when the federal government was feeling that things were sort of volatile, and that they had an opportunity to select what they might consider the quote-unquote natural leaders in the community, and to involve them in trying to better the community so they weren't doing some other things which they might perceive as dysfunctional and as a threat to the system. But after the initial funding period, that this project would go the way of most other projects, which is to fizzle out.
Actually, most of them.
Most of them,
Most
in fact, did because of the initial funding period. And then there was to be a period where there was partial federal funding while the center themselves, and I think this is the model, the center themselves generates private funds, and then there is a declining ratio of federal to private funds. After a period of time, there are no federal funds, and most projects, and I've worked in some subsequently, they failed. And
Matter of fact,
so,
some people say that the government lost the war on poverty. We're one of the few survivors.
exactly, exactly. But now, and there's still debate about this, whether or not, in fact, it was the long-term intention of the federal government to actually open up the policy-making process at any level of government to grassroots citizens over the long term. There's some question about whether or
I don't
not
think
that, in
that
fact,
was.
was the motivation.
I don't think it was, but one of the things I think happened that resisted them maintaining their own control, that there were a large number of middle-class professional blacks who insisted upon the poor being a part of this process, and who resisted the idea of, no, the poor cannot be involved in this. I remember that most of us who were on that board were more militant than not, and we insisted upon the relationship of the people from that community and what happened there. And I think that made a key difference in what went on. There were about 3 or 4 of us who were born in the same sort of surroundings, who came from a background that was similar to everybody in the community, who felt a part of it, no different, had relatives who were from the same environment, and so there was no difference in how we saw. It wasn't a we-they process in that particular sense of wanting them to have particular
Shirley, I remember you had
service.
the biggest knackle I'd ever seen.
Yeah. I thought Essie had the biggest
No,
natural.
yours was the biggest I'd ever seen.
Is that
for
right?
a small person.
Is that right?
Yes.
There was the we-they process of us against the doctors.
Well,
There was a lot of we
I gotta add,
and they
though.
process against them.
I gotta add that there was the board and its internal working processes went through a period of growth. Any organization, any group goes through a period of trust building, a period where you get to know one another and you get to see what the other person's really made of, whether or not they keep their word, whether or not they attend these meetings, and whether or not over the long term that you can trust them. And I certainly do think that there were some...
Well, I told about how I was treated at the very beginning by board members.
I was in school at the time. As a matter of fact, in school at night, and I would go on other days when I didn't come to the meetings, and I'd be sitting there, since the meetings went on sometimes well into the night, and I'd be sitting there reading my history or reading this or reading that. And there were sometimes some, early on at least, some class and what manifests themselves as class antagonisms.
Yeah. Oh, I felt that at the beginning.
Until in fact people did come to know you, to trust you, to understand that you had a long-standing commitment, that your commitment would be. I was of course 20 years younger. We were all 20 years younger since it was 20 years ago, and was not as well known perhaps as some of the other people in the community. I was just starting off my involvement, and I will say that at times getting to know some of the people that had been more active in the community, it took time.
And there was, within even the grassroots group, a great deal of differences, not only in reference to background and orientation, but age. We had women who were middle-aged and elderly, who came from a particular orientation and a particular background, and then we had the young male toughs who would get to fighting and turning over chairs and cursing and etc. Irrespective of any rules, Robert rules of order, who would fight the chair or herself.
Truth and work.
Yeah, we had to give up Robert. So there was that. You know, there was the class difference. Class was defined, at least for me, they would say, well, you know, you live on the other side of the freeway. And that meant that I was from a different class group. And my response was, well, I'm over here at night, you know, and the people right down the street are not sitting here at night. I'm sitting here at night, so I don't want to hear it, you know. And nobody's paying me. I'm doing this on my time, you see. And eventually, as I said that over and over again, that helped a great deal in saying, yes, she really does care about the community because she is here on her own time. It never did help very much in reference to the sexism that operated among the board members. Yeah. And I don't believe that part was ever really overcome in any true sense. I think there continued to be a very strong commitment to sexism on the part of male.
Was this a female-dominated organization in the beginning?
I would say that they had the job of doing the work, which is true in a lot of organizations. Sure. But whether or not you would translate that into power, I felt that we were constantly questioned and I don't know the other word I want to use, but questioned in reference to our knowledge and our ability to do this or the other based on being female. Though I don't know that the males often took on the heavy jobs of getting the work done, but that didn't mean that they didn't dominate the group.
Yeah, the officers were women.
The first chairman was a woman.
She was a woman. I was the first vice.
Yes.
The secretary was a woman. The treasurer was a woman. Because as you look in some of the pictures, those persons sitting across the front of the table
they were running
were in fact we were certainly the titular heads. We was the up front folks. Yeah. But if you look at what time period this was, it was also a time period when black men were moving into the ascendancy in both what we might call, quote unquote, the revolutionary movement, as well as into some of the community kinds of organizations. So there was the feeling that if one were genuinely and truly black and supportive of the movement, then they supported black manhood and black leadership of the movement, of organizations. Now, as again, we were doing the kind of formal sort of stuff, which is still done, but Tommy Jackett was on that board at that time.
Was Billy Tidwell on that board?
No, Billy Tidwell was not. In fact, Billy wasn't here at that time. But you remember that after the women were the chair, when I left off the board, Butch Crosby was the chair. And I think
this very young man too.
Yeah,
you're right.
Butch came into that position of chair based upon that philosophy. You said that we felt that men ought to be given the leadership role because at that part of the movement there was a lot of concern that black males had been held down in the society, and black women ought to do everything they could to push the black men forward.
Talk a little bit about that, Butch Crosby, because I read an article today on him in the newsletter. In fact, he died in December of 1970 or 71. That was right after Ms. Walters resigned the board. They talked about Butch and his role in the community, OIC, and how he walked the streets and how he was able to get a lot of things done. Could you just explain this?
He was a young fellow. I think the first thing you have to remember about him is his mother. That's the first place you have to go. His mother, Mother Crosby, was considered one of the mothers of whites. And she was a very fine woman. I think she had about 8 or 9 children. And she had been very committed to seeing that her children got a good education. And she had been a part of the mothers of Watts that were monitoring Jordan Downs High School, because we were having a lot of problems with Jordan Downs High School. And most of her kids were either in, out, or somewhere around in there, because she had a number of children at that time. And I think it was her commitment to the community that was instilled in Butch. So that when we talk about Butch, we have to go back a little bit further to his mother. So when his mother was on the board or attended the meetings, you know, oftentimes I didn't know who was a member of the board and who was a community people, because we'd have lots of people here sometimes. Sure. And they would come, you know, every time we had a meeting. So it got to be a place where everybody was. So you didn't know, and since nobody went by Robert's Rule of Order, they might vote and not vote. Stop the meeting, or might be at that particular time. So I do remember that she came to a number of the meetings and was well liked by all of us at that point. So Butch, as one of her older children, was brought into the group at that particular time. And I remember they had
Class.
Okay. He and his mother were very close. Now, I cannot tell you about his outside activities. I do know that Butch carried with him a dignity and a commitment to that board. He was there at the meeting. He was one of the younger fellows who did not operate in a challenging way. Butch attempted not to operate in that challenging fashion, which some of the younger fellas felt was a need simply because they'd never been able to exercise power before in a formal organization, and this was an opportunity to do so. So whether there was a need to challenge it now, sometimes there was challenging done. Butch didn't have need to do that, and I think that is why all of us on the board, from the older women to the professionals to the young males in the group, voted for Butch to be the chairperson, because he represented to us all a bridge, a good bridge, and a good beginning of young male leadership in the community. And so he operated well. He didn't have all of the skills and background and knowledge of running a formal board, but none of the rest of us did either, because none of us had run a board before. So it was new even for the professionals. They hadn't done that much of it. So in that sense, I think Butch was a good bridge for us, and he did a very fine job. He was a peacemaker. He was respected enough by the young toughs that he could get them from time to time to sit down and attend the meeting in an orderly fashion. He was well respected by the older women in the group, and he was very respectful of them. And I think this was because of the relationship he had with his mother. I was very sorry when I heard the following year that he had been killed. I was very, very sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say just one more word about the business that Shirley was talking about Butch being able to get folks to sort of sit down and follow whatever the rules were so that the meeting could proceed. If we put this again in time perspective, we're talking about 1967. This, our brochure, this is September 1967 when we held the opening. So
Did we see that? Could you
yes, let me pass that around. So we're talking about 67 through 69, when there was which was in fact a time when black people were using disruptive tactics. And the disruptive tactics were an effort to get around frequently a set agenda. This is the way we do things, and we have things in order here, and whether or not we get to your concern is that's another matter. And one way to get around that purpose was to say, wait a minute, I don't care what your agenda is. We're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this now.
And it was productive. Right.
It was productive. Some fellow might jump up and throw a chair up against the wall, and the next thing you knew, the top thing on the agenda was dealing with whatever it was that you had determined was right. To be the issue. Right. So I will say that there was...
Yes, I think that point is well taken. Because it had to be learned by us. It's the only way to get around the rigid system.
That's right. So that this is what we're going to do. We're going to cast aside those kinds of rules, and we're going to deal with what, what the issue is. So there was those tactics were in fact used in our own meetings.
Well, let me say this. As everybody knows, all OEO products had a 5-year self-destruction period built in. That's one of the reasons that instead of a permanent structure, they put bungalows on 103rd and Great. What do you see yourself now from the outside has made this organization successful? And from your perspective.
Let me just say first, and I'd like to think about that a little bit. I think one of the things that's always important in establishing stability for an organization is to be able to reach down into the community and to actually involve in your organization those people who are actually what one might call pillars of the community, leaders of the community, those persons who can themselves get involved and motivate other people to get involved, and who are hooked up with the power structure in such a way that they can assist in bringing resources into the center. I would suggest that that is one of the reasons that this organization is one of the ones that made it out of that five-year period. I would also suggest that the people that were selected to be on the board were committed. They were committed enough to come to meetings. As I say, that was sometimes 3 times a week. That's a lot. That's a lot of meeting. And meeting until 9 and 10. Everybody's working in the day, and I was going to school at night as well. So that there were people who were in fact committed to seeing something different happen here, to saying that in fact we do have these kinds of medical needs, and how can we use this center not only as a medical facility, but sort of as a hub around which other services in this community can be constructed. And so I think that those 2 things are the things that I would say right off the top. That is that the kinds of people that were involved initially, and Burdell Moore, she talked about the kinds of resources and the kinds of linkages she had with downtown, and the kinds of calls that she could make, and the things that would happen as a result of that. Certainly that was key. And then again, the commitment. I think that we were living in a different time than we're living in now. There was certainly heightened black awareness. And at that time, the board was predominantly black. We were living in a time when we felt that if it is up to us, and I think we're again coming back to the time where there's a recognition. We've been through a period where the federal government has pumped in some money, frequently provisionally in a short-term fashion, and we're seeing that we're not able to institutionalize it on that basis. There was a sense that we have to make some things happen for ourselves. And so I think that that too contributed to it. But again, I do not feel that that there was a belief that this center would be around, that here let us pay these people, because that, I think, while I agree with the concept of compensating people for their time, I think there may have been in the back of somebody's mind the whole notion that people will come for the money, because $15, and we're talking in 1967, $15 a month, a meeting, 4 meetings a month, that's $120. Now, whether or not people accomplish anything in the time when they're receiving that money, they would think it might be rather beside the point, but the people would be there so that they could say in their quarterly reports to HH, to Sergeant Shriver, who did come out for our opening, that we do have this board and they're operating and so on. But there were some other things. I think there was a contextual time in which this developed that had a really significant impact.
No, I have nothing to add to that. I think she elaborated well on that point. I think that made much of a difference. I would assume, though I don't have this knowledge firsthand, I would assume that the health professionals who worked here must have been a much committed group. I did know some of the social workers, some of the psychologists. I did know a number of the physicians and nurses very well. But my assumption has to be that those people who first started off working here were committed to more than just a paycheck, because it was not easy working here. Just the instance I told you about, the fellows coming into the emergency room, just begins to tell you how rancorous some of our board meetings were. The idea that there was a we and they process operating, and that you had, having run Westminster, I was executive director of Westminster for about 6 or 7 months during that period of time, having a staff where 40 to 45% of the people have never worked before. Believe me, it's something to deal with when you're trying to run an organization. And I'm sure those sort of problems must have been here at South Central Multi-Purpose Health Services Center at that time. So there had to be a lot of committed professionals, paraprofessionals, who stuck it out, got the trust of the people in the community, got them to know that I'm really here because I'm concerned about you, and stayed on this job beyond the money, because after the early 50s, agencies opened up all over the place, and persons did move out and could move out to work outside of Watson. They didn't want to work here. So those who stayed here and those who came here subsequent to that must have been some committed people.
I had an opportunity to see again the original administrator. What was his name?
Mr. Hall,
Mr. Hall.
Charles Hall.
Charles Hall.
He's in San Francisco.
That's correct. Well, he came to the luncheon. And I can remember many times when he would be at our meetings as well, 2-3 times a week. The personnel meeting that I was talking about was one where he was on the carpet trying to explain to folks that we only have so many jobs open at this point, and you know it's awfully hard. And we're talking about the community, and the community folks in here saying, wait a minute, I want a job here, this is my center, I want a job here. And we've said, all right, would you please explain to us the status of job openings and why it is these 50 people right here can't come and work here? And he would have to explain to them and handle the situation. So again, I would agree with you.
I think
that
too,
is more, was certainly more than the
right.
money.
I think it's also true in reference to USC administration and doctors. I have to think back over Elsie, Georgia. She took a lot of heat, and from nobody else from me. I was studying on her case and watching to see what it was she was doing at the time. I was as suspicious as any community, because I saw myself as a community person, as any community person could have been, about what do these white doctors want here. I remember that the president of USC, I'm trying to remember how this process was. Norman Toppin, that's right. He put aside some money, some sort of way, to ensure that something was done here that the federal government wasn't paying for. Now, I can't remember how this went because that's how we got his name. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known it. There were several white doctors who were advisors from USC to the board and to the Senate.
Dr. Tranquillier?
Huh?
Do you remember the name Dr. Tranquillier?
I don't remember his name, but I do remember this poor man coming under fire. He was just like Joan of Arc at the stake. And he would come in at these meetings, and he didn't end up pink as anything could be, because I mean he was just burning. And I even got to the point because they harassed him so, trashed him so when he came to these meetings, that I took him aside and said, look, doctor, if you're going to continue to come to these meetings, you have got to keep your hands up and stop dropping them to your side. By that I meant you have to stand up for yourself here, you have to speak up, you have to talk with conviction, and you got to stop backing down like you're scared of people. If you act scared, we'll think you're lying. Okay? So if you're not lying, don't act scared. Say it with conviction so we know what you're talking about, and stand up to us. Don't keep backing down like you think we're all going to pull a knife and stab you.
Sure.
You know? We're not going to do that. But you got to speak up or we won't believe you. Because we don't have respect for males who are passive. That is not the male model in the black community. So if you act passively like this, we think you're a poop butt, and we're not going to respect you.
I think that there's a double edge to that as well. And that is that since there was such a heightened and very healthy paranoia, suspicion, and so on of white people, since we were then even beginning to articulate how whites in America had systematically disenfranchised blacks. I mean, it's not that we didn't know what our history was, but it wasn't until 1968 that the whole concept of institutionalized racism was formulated. So if you were white, you might be very well trusted today and tomorrow and next week, but the week after that, somehow the group might jump you. And you had to be prepared if in fact you wanted to come and work in the black community. That any time some new person might come in, they want to know who is that white woman and why is she having so much to say about everything. And the persons, and I've known a few, Dr. Georgie is one, but I've worked with several others who in fact had the commitment and had a thick enough skin, because otherwise it could leave you crying. Simply because you got the trust, simply because, and if you talk too bold, somebody wanted to be saying, now wait a minute, he's too bold. He's not in control here, and you know, so that it was a razor's edge that any non-indigenous person to the community had to deal with. And Dr. Georgie, she got hers. People would jump her periodically. If something didn't go right, it's her fault. And see, the other thing was, while SC was our supporting institution, we never saw any of the administration of SC. Norman Topping never came down to this facility. So it was sort of, they were sort of in absentia. We did have Sergeant Shriver come to give our opening.
That's right.
Somebody threw something.
His wife was here. That's right. I remember.
I mean, someone from the crowd
threw something at him. But he took it very well, very gracefully. He didn't let it stop him.
No, he kept right on
going. His wife was here with him, Eunice Shriver, and a couple of his kids who looked just like the Kennedy kids look. And they were teenagers at that point. I guess the ones that he brought along with him. I do remember seeing them and saying that they all look like what Kennedys are supposed to look like. I think of one of them.
Rich.
Yeah, but a common flavor to them, a relaxed feeling among us. That's what I meant. Not so much the richness which was there, but the fact that they were a group of white people who you got the feeling they were not frightened. They were concerned within whatever their ability was. I didn't see them looking down their nose at us. I didn't feel that particular. When you think about Dr. Georgie and others, I think about Father Sam. How many of you remember Father Sam? Father Sam was the other.
Morris Sam, the Episcopal priest.
The Episcopal priest, Father Sam. He was the other. Do you remember Father Sam?
Not at the center.
I saw a picture of him today too.
No, he wasn't at the center. But he was one of the few white people in this community, along with Dr. Georgie, who has a thick enough skin to take it. He worked at Westminster.
He was tough.
He was tough. He was able to hang in here with it. And in fact, I remember, well, that's a different answer. I won't talk
Come
about
on.
what I'm saying.
Come on.
Oh, I remember one time, used to be a tree. And all these things are part of what happens in the community. If you're not part of the community, you don't understand. There was a tree on the other side of Beach Street, right in front of Westminster Neighborhood Association, on Beach and
You talking about the Freedom Tree?
No, not that
wasn't
tree. No, not that one. This was over at Beach Street. The Freedom Tree was over near Wilmington. Anyway, I think, or on 103rd. The fellows were standing under this tree. It was one of the few trees that gave any shade. And they were standing. The fellows were, and Beach Street was a narrow street at that time, if you remember when Westminster stood on that corner, 103rd. The fellows were just standing there, must have been 6 or 7, just standing loud, talking loud among themselves, and as they, and the police drove by, and started snatching the fellas, saying, "Come here, fellas, come here, all of you," and Father Sam came at that time and said, "What's in big trouble? All these fellas congregating here, they're about to go and steal something. I know that." I was about to stretch them all out, and Father Sam was one said, "Okay, now if you're going to arrest them, you're going to have to arrest me too." And he threw himself out in the same thing. Not just arrest all of us, take us all downtown, and then charge us for something, And I felt at that time we were still intimidated by the police. The police were not really to be messed with. They were, in many instances, very vicious, abusive group of men that had to be dealt with, those who were white, and had a little understanding about the community. And I don't think one just went to get arrested on humble. You have to think about that a little bit. And I think Father Sam, just as an example of a person who's really committed to this community.
Well, talking about Dr. Georgie, she recently was appointed to the board of directors. She's now back within the organization. And she's never lost track of the organization. We've dedicated a library in her honor. And she's been a very large contributor to her own library. So she's still been very active. And like I said, now she's back as a member of the board of directors.
She wasn't a member of the board in your time, in the 60s.
No.
She's now a member of the board of directors as of 1986.
Associate project coordinator or something.
She had a functional title.
She was project coordinator at that time? Yeah, I knew she had a liaison role. But she's the one who wrote the proposal that got this place funded.
Yeah, it's interesting that when she was talking about...
What was that?
Did she even put out some money?
I have no doubt in my mind that she probably did.
Flying back and forth to Washington at the beginning to try to get this proposal funded. I wouldn't doubt it
You
one
know,
more bit.
it's interesting that when she was talking at the luncheon about how she
It
happened
was
to
on
come
February
down.
1st, 1986.
Yes,
Yes.
the one, that's correct.
Yes.
About how she happened to come down to the community at the request of Mrs. Epps, who happened to have been my minister's wife, to come down into the community, you know, given there were no health services here, and to examine some of the children.
Children, that's correct.
And she talked about having examined over 300 children in that one day, and really seeing that, given the status of their health, that they were really being put out of opportunities or held back from opportunities before they had an opportunity to even try. And I do believe that her commitment was genuine. And it really well, I felt good also about my minister and the church that I went to, about the kinds of things that went on that they stimulated in the community, and often without anybody knowing. That's the first time I'd heard that Mrs. Frances Epps is the one that invited, Dr. Georgie down here to look at the children, and as a result, it's a ripple effect. And I'm not even sure, as a matter of fact, he has moved his ministry. But next time that they're here, I'm certainly going to let her know that out of some of her efforts, I would like to do that. I'm sure she would love to see what has come out of something, come out of that.
Well, I want to thank.
Why don't you give about a 2-minute
Two-minute closing statement. Shirley, we can
About
start.
the future, the past, and then a little glimpse into the future.
Well, if I could sort of wrap up in a 2-minute period of time, which is hard for me because I'm a talker, as you well know. I think what I see happening here is like when I came to this luncheon on February 1st of 1986, that this has been one of the few organizations that's been able to survive over this 15 years of tremendous changes in American society, especially as it relates to providing equality for the minorities in America. And I think that this health center represents one of the successes in that model, and I'm pleased to be a part of it. When I drive up to the health center, the 2 times I've been here recently, it gives a real positive feeling and sense of life to this community. I remember Watts as being a depressed area with no movie theaters, no roller skating rink, no decent restaurants. And now when I come on 103rd Street, I see the vitality, I see the cleanness of the street, I see the modernness of this building, the planned landscape, and it gives us a new tempo and quality of life, and I hope to the young people of this community of what can be done when the minorities of all classes join together to try to produce something real in the community.
I would as well like to say that I am really honored to have had an opportunity to be a part of an institution that has remained in the community. I think that this institution should be proud for other reasons as well. Number one, it's on the cutting edge of a new method for the delivery of health services in the country. It's a health maintenance organization that has started here, and as I understand now has facilities up and down the state of California. As we know, the state of California is now experimenting with a capitated health program that's based at King, which is really attempting to replicate the model that has been produced here. So I'm really very pleased about that in the sense that we were sort of ahead of the times. I would only hope that we can look around our community as we did, as was done 25 years ago, and identify other problems, other areas that need the concerted and coordinated, that need a concerted and coordinated approach in order to deal with them, and employment is one such area. And I know that this facility does provide employment to persons that live in this community, and I would certainly hope that something out of their efforts in some way, an approach to providing employment on a broader scale can be developed. That is the concern that I have.
Mr. Mendoza.
Well, from where we're at now, I think our intent has changed very little, except that in your times were harder when it was started. And as long as we keep abreast or listen to the community, I don't think the center would have to fear of going under. Although sure, doctors cost more money, but I see that as long as they're providing, they're worth it. Whatever it takes in money, the persons are producing, and also that we continue to do what we have been doing, and don't forget the community. In fact, wherever the United Health Plan has a center, plant some seeds in that area. And I think we don't have to worry about going under, because it's like saying, well, look at the Russians, they might bomb us all, but you know what, I don't think they could capture the world, because they would have to put a guard on each individual. They have to sleep, and I think that's where we're at. I think we're moving fast. Yeah, I know some of us will always think, hey, I wonder if we're moving too fast, if it'll be, you know, our breaking point. But I think with the help of the community, we can fail.
I want to thank everybody for being here for this Project 20 interview. I hope you continue to provide us with your expertise. And maybe, again, like Dr. George, you come back and become a member of the board of directors.
Thank you for inviting me.